Hello, this video, as the title suggests, is about falsification of history in the Republic of Azerbaijan. There are many other topics that can be talked about regarding this country. Like the amount of massacres it committed, its corruption, lack of freedom of speech, suppression of ethnic minorities, evil acts, bribery and much more, but today I will focus on falsification of history in this country. Falsification of history in Azerbaijan is an evaluative definition, which, according to a number of authors, should characterize the historical research carried out in Azerbaijan with state support. The purpose of these studies is to exalt the Caucasian Albanians as the alleged ancestors of Azerbaijanis, claim lots of empires that existed before 1918, like the Safavids, and to provide a historical basis for territorial disputes with Armenia. At the same time, the task is, firstly, to root Azerbaijanis in the territory of Azerbaijan, and secondly, to cleanse the latter of its Armenian heritage. According to the researcher Shireen Hunter, the distorted understanding by many Azerbaijanis of the true nature of cultural, ethnic and historical ties between Iran and Azerbaijan is associated with the legacy inherited by the modern Azerbaijan Republic from the long Soviet practice of historic falsification. To such historical myths she refers, in particular, to the idea of the existence in ancient times of a unified Azerbaijani state, which included most of the territory of present-day northern Iran and Armenia, but which was divided into two parts as a result of a Russian-Iranian conspiracy as an intellectually dishonest revisionist theory. The history of Caucasian Albania has been a major topic of Azerbaijani revisionist theories, which came under criticism in Western and Russian academic and analytical circles, and were often characterized as bizarre and futile. In his article, The Albanian Myth, Russian historian and anthropologist Viktor Schnirelmann states that Azerbaijani academics have been renaming prominent medieval Armenian political leaders, historians and writers, who lived in Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia into Albanians. Schnirelmann argues that these efforts were first launched in the 1950s and were directed towards ripping the population of early medieval Nagorno-Karabakh off from their Armenian heritage and cleansing Azerbaijan of Armenian history. In the 1970s, Azerbaijan made a transition from ignoring, discounting or concealing Armenian historical heritage in Soviet Azerbaijan to misattributing and mischaracterizing it as examples of Azerbaijani culture by arbitrarily declaring Caucasian Albanians as ancestors of modern Azerbaijanis. In this regard, Thomas de Waal, a scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, writes about the political context of Azerbaijan's historical revisionism, in quote, "This bizarre argument has the implication that Nagorno-Karabakh had been Caucasian Albanian and that Armenians had no claim to it." Schnirelmann states that a significant revisionist method used by Azerbaijani scholars was republishing of ancient and medieval sources, where the term Armenian state was routinely and systematically removed and replaced with Albanian state. American author George Bernushin gives examples of how that was done by Zia Buniyatov, vice-chairman of Azerbaijani Academy of Sciences, who earned the nickname of Azerbaijan's foremost Armenophobe. Buniyatov's scholarly credentials were dubious. It later transpired that the two articles he published in 1960 and 1965 on Caucasian Albania were direct plagiarism. Under his own name, he had simply published, unattributed, translations of two articles, originally written in English by Western scholars C.F.J. Dowsett and Robert Hewson. According to de Waal, a disciple of Buniyatov, Farida Mammadova, has taken the Albanian theory and used it to push Armenians out of the Caucasus altogether. She had relocated Caucasian Albania into what is now the Republic of Armenia. According to her, all lands, churches, and monasteries in the Republic of Armenia, all had been Albanian. No sacred Armenian fact was left unattacked. De Waal describes Mammadova as a sophisticated end of what, quote, in Azerbaijan has become a very blunt instrument indeed. Both Zia Buniyatov and Farida Mammadova are known for their anti-Armenian public pronouncements and pamphlets. Historical revisionism in Azerbaijan supported a number of policies on the ground, including cultural vandalism directed against Armenian monuments in Soviet and post-Soviet Azerbaijan. Armenian memorial stone crosses known as kochkars on the territory of Azerbaijan were regularly misrepresented as Caucasian Albanian both before and after Azerbaijan's independence. Furthermore, mischaracterization of Armenian kochkars as supposedly non-Armenian monuments of Caucasian Albania was associated with acts of cultural vandalism against Armenian historical monuments in Nakhichevan. The Kochkar destruction in Nakhchivan refer to the systematic campaign by the government of Azerbaijan to completely demolish the Armenian cemetery in Julfa with thousands of Armenian kochkars near the town of Julfa, known as Juga in Armenian, which was the biggest cultural genocide in the 21th century. Claims that Azerbaijan was undertaking a systematic campaign to destroy and remove the monuments first arose in late 1998 and those charges were renewed in 2002 and 2005. Adam T. Smith, an anthropologist and associate professor of anthropology at the University of Chicago, called the removal of the kochkars a shameful episode in humanity's relation to its past, a deplorable act on the part of the government of Azerbaijan which requires both explanation and repair. Smith and other scholars, as well as several United States senators, signed a letter to the UNESCO and other organizations condemning Azerbaijan's government. Azerbaijan instead contends that the monuments were not of Armenian, but of Caucasian Albanian origin, although Caucasian Albania never reached Nakhchivan nor Karabakh, as the Kara River was the natural border between Armenia and Caucasian Albania, again showing how far Azerbaijani revisionism is willing to go in order to justify destruction of a historical place with false and bizarre claims, which, per Thomas de Waal, did not protect the graveyard from uncultural genocide. Anti-Armenian cultural vandalism in Azerbaijan perpetrated with the use of revisionist theories on Caucasian Albania was also noted in the northern parts of Azerbaijan, where Norwegian archaeologists were involved in the restoration of an Armenian Georgian church in the village of Kish near the city of Shaki. Azerbaijanis erased Armenian inscriptions on the church's walls, which led to an official complaint by Norwegian Foreign Ministry. Furthermore, revisionist theories about Caucasian Albania have also been used by Azerbaijani statesmen in the ongoing Azerbaijani-Georgian dispute over the territorial status of David Gareja Monastery Complex, a Georgian spiritual and historical monument partially located on the territory of Azerbaijani Republic. David Gareja is a rock-hewn Georgian Orthodox monastery complex in the Kakheti region of eastern Georgia, on the semi-desert slopes of Mount Gareja, some 6,070 kilometers southeast of Georgia's capital Tbilisi. Georgi Manjgaladze, Georgia's deputy foreign minister, proposed that Georgia would be willing to exchange other territory for the remainder of David Gareja because of its historical and cultural significance to the Georgians. Baku disapproves of this land swap, and in April 2007, Azerbaijan's deputy foreign minister Khalif Khalifov told a press conference in Baku that it was out of the question for Azerbaijan to give up its claims to the borderlands, including David Gareja. Khalifov then stated that the monastery was home to the Caucasian Albanians. Georgian art historian Dmitry Tumanishvili dismissed this claim and stated that the complex, in quote, is covered in the work of Georgian masters. There are Georgian inscriptions everywhere dating back to the 6th century, and there are no traces of another culture there. He ended his debunk with the sentence, "After that, I don't think you need any further proof." Now, let's talk about the Caucasian Khanates, which were marginalized in Soviet Azerbaijani historiography as remnants of an archaic feudal institution, have been revived in post-Soviet Azerbaijani historiography. They are difficult foundational pieces for a national narrative because of their briefness, diversity, and constant factional strife. Modern Azerbaijani academia and history books refer to all of the Khanates north and south of the Aras as Azerbaijani Khanates, reinventing them as the forerunners of the Azerbaijani nation. This includes the Karabakh Khanate, whose offshore Turkic Javanshir Khans are portrayed as Azerbaijani founding fathers. Additionally, the ethnic heritage of the nomads that lived in Karabakh, which included multiple Turkic, Kurdish, and other Caucasian tribes, is disregarded by Azerbaijani historians, who group them together with the Tatars, considering them all to be Azerbaijanis. However, before the 20th century, the Azerbaijanis didn't constituted as an ethnic group, much less a nation. The people who lived in the present-day country of Azerbaijan identified as either Muslims of the Ummah, or Turks, and some even as Persians. Before 1988, Azerbaijani experts did not dispute the historical Armenian presence in Nagorno-Karabakh, which changed when the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh demanded that their region break away from Azerbaijan. In order to defend their government's anti-Armenian policies in Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijani politicians, journalists, and academics asserted that the region had never been a part of historical Armenia and that the region's Armenian residents were immigrants who had slowly relocated there after 1828. The 2003 Azerbaijani edition of the Russian Survey of 1823 is an altered version of the original work. In addition to having several typographical errors, it also frequently omits key information, such as the word Armenian, either mistakenly or on purpose. Modern Azerbaijani scholars and historians claim that the present-day country of Azerbaijan and the Azerbaijan region in present-day northwestern Iran used to be one entity, based on arguments such as Nakhchivan and Southern Karabakh being temporarily part of the administrative division of the Iranian province of Azerbaijan and the similar-sounding names between the two places. Although the region where modern Azerbaijan lies was called Aran or Shirvan prior to 1918. Every current European historian, as well as 19th-century Russian and Iranian sources, consider them to have been two distinct geographical and political areas. Prior to 1918 the word Azerbaijan referred to the Iranian region of Azerbaijan and was only copied by the Musavat party, in order to make claims to the Persian region of Azerbaijan and to find a distinct, as well as unifying name for the diverse Turkic, Iranian and Caucasian mixed populations this country inherited, where the language now known as North Azerbaijani was used as a linguistic binder for this nation. From the mid-2000s, the concept of a Western Azerbaijan, originally a colloquialism used by some Azerbaijani refugees to refer to the Armenian SSR of the Soviet Union, was merged into renewed interest of the Khanates of the Caucasus, in what the historian and political scientist Lawrence Broers explains as wide-ranging fetishization of the Yerevan Khanate as a historically Azerbaijani entity. Azerbaijani historiography regards the Yerevan Khanate as an Azerbaijani state, which was populated by autochthonous Azerbaijani Turks, and its soil is sacralized, as Broers adds, as the burial ground of semi-mythological figures from the Turkic pantheon. In the process of employing historical negationism, it has undergone the same type of transformation within Azerbaijani historiography like the historic entity of Caucasian Albania before it. Within Azerbaijani historiography, the terms Azerbaijani Turk and Muslim are used interchangeably when dealing with the Yerevan Khanate, even though contemporary demographic surveys differentiate Muslims into Persians, Shia and Sunni Kurds and Turkic tribes, and also, although the rulers themselves spoke Persian and used it as the official language, as well as referring to themselves as Iranians. The Blue Mosque in Yerevan, which is littered with Persian inscriptions and was built during the reign of the Iranian Yerevan Khanate, has also been regarded by Azerbaijani revisionists as Azerbaijani. Broers regards this phenomenon in Azerbaijan as being part of a wide Azerbaijanism, a geopolitical confection emerging at the meeting point of two previously subdued geographies made relevant by both sovereignty and the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh. According to Broers, catalogues of lost Azerbaijani heritage portray an array of Turkic palimpsest beneath almost every monument and religious site in Armenia, whether Christian or Muslim. Additionally, from around 2007, standard maps of Azerbaijan started to show Turkic toponyms printed in red underneath the Armenian ones on the major part of Armenia which it shows. Another part of falsification in the country of Azerbaijan is the claim that the AK Koyunlu, Kara Koyunlu, Safavid, Afshar and Qajar empires were Azerbaijani. As for the AK and Kara Koyunlu, they were descended of the Yiva and Bayandar tribes respectively. The Bayandar were one of the 7 Turkic tribes that made up the Kuman-Kipchak Confederation, but after leaving them for the Oghuz and migrating southward, they founded the AK Koyunlu. The founders of the Kara Koyunlu, the Yiva tribe, was one of the 24 Oghuz tribes. As many other tribes that would immigrate south, they founded an empire, which promoted Turkic and Persian culture. As to why both of these couldn't have been Azeri, is because first, the Bayander tribe was of Kipchak origin and therefore not compatible with the Turkic, Iranian and Caucasian mix that Azerbaijanis are, and the Yiva tribe was one of the original 24 Oghuz tribes, aka pure Turks that rooted their origins in the legendary Oghuz Khan and thus also not compatible with the mix that North Azerbaijanis are. As for Safavid Iran, it was originally a Iranian, or specific calls Kurdish dynasty in origin. The Safawiya Sufi order immigrated to Ardabil in the 14th century and thus then came in contact with Turkic tribes, which they would bring under their control, using them as mercenaries for their goals, while also learning their Oghuz Turkic language, in order to properly govern and advise them. On top of that, the Safavids intermarried with Greeks, Georgians, Circassians, Turkomans and Manzandirian Iranians, to strengthen their ties with powerful dynasties, while also holding tight to their Iranian identity, as they saw themselves as Persians and the future rulers of Iran. When Shah Ismail brought Iran under his control, he crowned himself Shahanshah, called his empire the Persian Empire, the expansive realm of Iran, the state of Iran, and the guarded domains of Iran. Ismail also loved Iranian legends, as when he reached Lahijan in 1494, he gifted Mirza Ali Karkia a copy of the medieval Persian epic Shahnameh with over 300 illustrations. Ismail also named 3 of his 4 sons after mythological shahs and heroes of the Shahnameh. For example, his oldest son was named Tahmasp, after the last Shah of the Pishdadian dynasty. Shah Ismail also made Persian the official language, inscription language on coinage, language of civil administration, court language, literary language, language of theological discourse, language of diplomatic correspondence, language of historiography and language of court-based religious posts. While using a Turkic language, which is most similar to the Turkic languages spoken in the north of Iran today, like Afshar, South Azeri, Sankuri and so on, only for the army, which consisted of the Turkic Kizilbash we talked about earlier and for the court, due to the amount of Turks who couldn't speak Persian, just like Armenian, Georgian and Circassian also were court languages. Shah Ismail also wrote poetry under the name Khatay, which is Arabic for sinner. He wrote his poetry in Persian and the dialect of Turkic he inherited. The Turkic parts often were used to spread propaganda amongst the Turkic Kizilbash, but since he grew up bilingual, he also would use the Turkic language in other ways except spreading propaganda, for example for personal poetry, since he also found enjoyment in Turkic works of poetry and contributed to them. The Shahs which came after Ismail further and further demolished the Kizilbash, as they saw a threat in the Turkic army and thus came to supplant many of them with Georgian, Armenian and Circassian gulams, in order for the army to stay obedient, once again showing that they saw the Turks only as useful pawns. Now, as we can see, the Safavids also according to all Western scholars were an Iranian empire and is often considered the beginning of modern Iranian history, as well as one of the gunpowder empires. Now it's time for Afshar Iran. It has its origins in a Afshar Turkic tribesman of Khorasan named Nadir Shah. Altoug being of Afshar Turkic heritage and growing up speaking Afshar Turkic and Persian, he established an Iranian empire and just like the Safavids called his country the guarded domains of Iran. He identified himself as Persian and abandoned Turkish as court and army language, making Persian the only language being used for any purposes. Which is also why his and the empire of his successors is considered Iranian and not Turkic, since except for him being born into a Afshar Turkic family, there wasn't anything Turkic about the dynasty. As already mentioned before, the empire didn't use Turkic for any purposes anymore and even forced Turks who only spoke Turkic to learn Persian. The Azerbaijani claim that the Afsharid Empire was Azerbaijani is even more dubious, considering that the Turkic tribe that founded the dynasty was Afshar Turkic, which is a tribe of the original 24 Oghuz tribes, has its own language and also a version of the tribe that lived in Khorasan. Thus having almost nothing in common with modern North Azeris. As stated by almost all historians who spoke of the dynasty, the best thing that describes it, is that it was a Persian dynasty of Turkic origin. Now comes the last empire, which is Qajar Iran. After the Persian Zand dynasty, which was of either Kurdish or La origin, the Qajar dynasty, which called itself the Sublime State of Iran when it rose to power, just as all Iranian dynasties before it, aka the Safavid, Afshar, and Zand, was known to the outer world as Persia and would lay the foundations of the modern state of Iran, by moving the capital to Tehran. As the name of the Qajar dynasty suggests, they originate from Turkic Qajar tribe, but just like the Afshars they did not use Turkic for any purposes, except for the court, when Turks were put on trial to better communicate with them. They also identified as Iranians, specifically Persians, and reasserted Iranian identity in the region. They even existed when the Republic of Azerbaijan was established in 1918 and even protested the use of the name Azerbaijan by the Republic, stating that they shouldn't steal the name of an Iranian province of theirs. Which just even more solidifies the Qajars also didn't view themselves as Azerbaijanis, since even in origin they were no Azeris, but Iranians, with origins in the Qajar tribe. The fetishization of those three Iranian empires is just going to show how far the Azerbaijani Republic is willing to go in order to lay any historic claim on Armenian or Iranian regions. The need to appropriate history of other nations, particularly Iran, is highly criticized by historians and seen as a desperate move to justify any claim Azerbaijan wants to make, according to critics like Thomas Duval. Now, let's come to the next topic. The claim that Armenians didn't live in Armenia or Artsakh before 1828. Obviously I don't need to explain why this is plain stupid, but what people like Aliyev try to do, is misusing or misquoting or disregarding population surveys. As for mountainous Karabakh, here is the proof that since the earliest times where real population surveys existed, Armenians were always stated to be the majority. According to an 1823 Russian survey published in Tiflis, present-day Tbilisi, Armenians made up 97% of the population in the 5 districts Mahals of Nagorno-Karabakh, thus proving, contrary to claims in Azerbaijani historiography, that Armenians formed an overwhelming majority of Nagorno-Karabakh prior to 1828. The historical Nagorno-Karabakh region had a population of 330,000 in 1918, but as a result of Turkish-Azerbaijani aggression, with acts like the Shusha massacre, the region's population declined by 20% in 1920. In this period, Azerbaijani forces carried out massacres against Armenians in Gabalishan, Jamili, Karkijahan, and Palil, 700 dead, Stepanakert, several hundred dead, and Shusha, 20,000 dead. As a result of the Shusha massacre, 6,000 Armenians were displaced to the regions of Varanda and Dizak. By April 11, 1920, some 30 villages in Nagorno-Karabakh had been devastated by Azerbaijani forces as a result of those acts, leaving 25,000 homeless. But I won't delve any further into this topic, since it would fall under massacres committed by Azerbaijan, and this topic will be covered in another video. As for Yerevan and some other regions of eastern Armenia, the Armenian population was only 20%, while the Muslim, Persians, Kurds, Turkic tribes and Turkified tribes, population was 80% of the population. This is partially due to massacres committed by Timur and other Turkic empires which conquered and wreaked havoc on the region, but the primary reason are the deportations of Shah Abbas. In 1605 Shah Abbas deported 350,000 Armenians from Iranian Armenia into central Iran, particularly Isfahan, where he founded an Armenian district named New Julfa, named after the historical Armenian city Julfa, which is now sadly in Azerbaijan. When Russia conquered the region from the Persians, thousands of Armenians would repatriate to their homeland and once again constitute a majority in eastern Armenia, while even during the deportations they were still a majority in Nagorno-Karabakh. In the Second Karabakh War, churches were shelled for no reason, especially the Gaziantep's cathedral, which first has been bombed and then, when Azeri as well as Turkish forces gained control over it, had the church's roof removed and vandalized. The same goes for other churches, while some churches even were destroyed completely, or had the Armenian inscriptions inside of them removed. This is once again a sad act of cultural genocide that is acknowledged by Western, Russian and Armenian sources alike. Well, now we have exposed lots of Azerbaijan's delusional claims, but one question remains: why are most North Azerbaijanis, especially those who live or have lived in the Republic of Azerbaijan, so ignorant towards history and actually believe in these ridiculous falsifications? The answer is, that the government, especially the schools of Azerbaijan, indoctrinate their children. Azerbaijani history books teach hate against Armenians and explain every falsification I have covered so far. Actually even more, since if I were to cover every falsification brought up in the schoolbooks, this video would be way too long, although it is already very long. This was it for today's video. Tell me what other videos you would like me to make in the comments, but now, anyways, goodbye.